The dust swirled in golden clouds across the Texas horizon as Emma O'Sullivan stumbled along the lonely dirt road, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping a tattered leather satchel containing everything she had left in the world. The June heat of 1875 beat down mercilessly, and the sharp pain that had started as a dull ache an hour ago now threatened to bring her to her knees. Just a little further, she gasped, though she had no idea where further might lead. The small town of Redemption was still miles away, and the stagecoach that had ejected her upon discovering her condition had long disappeared into the distance, leaving only a trail of dust and the driver's cruel laughter. Emma took another shaky step forward before the world began to spin. The pain tore through her abdomen with such ferocity that she couldn't even cry out. Her knees buckled, and the hard-packed earth rushed up to meet her as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. As consciousness slipped away, she thought she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching, but it was too late to call for help. Her last thought was of the child within her and a prayer that someone might save them both. Daniel Xavier had been riding since dawn, eager to reach his ranch before nightfall. The 2 years he'd spent building up the Double X from nothing had hardened him in ways he'd never expected when he'd left Boston with dreams of a new life in Texas. At 32, his face was weathered by sun and wind, his dark hair streaked with occasional silver, though his keen blue eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had served him well in this unforgiving land. He just crested a small rise when he spotted something unusual on the road ahead, a splash of faded blue calico against the dusty brown earth. Pulling back on his horse's reins, Daniel narrowed his eyes against the glare of the setting sun. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured to his stallion as they approached what he now could see was a woman lying motionless in the dirt. Daniel dismounted quickly, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the ground. He approached cautiously. Life in the West had taught him that not everything was as it seemed, and ambushes weren't uncommon along these lonely stretches. But as he drew closer, Daniel's wariness gave way to concern. The woman was young, perhaps mid-20s, with hair the color of wheat falling from a once neat bun. Her face, though streaked with dust and tears, was delicate, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. And she was unmistakably with child, her belly swollen beneath the worn fabric of her dress. Daniel knelt beside her, checking first for a pulse. It fluttered beneath his fingertips, weak but present. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by worry when he noticed the dampness beneath her skirt. "Madam," he called, gently tapping her cheek. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of spring leaves before they closed again. A small moan escaped her lips. Decision made, Daniel carefully slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. With a grunt, he lifted her, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to his horse. "I'll get you home, darling," he said softly, the endearment slipping out unbidden. "Just hold on." It wasn't easy getting her onto his horse while keeping her secure, but years of handling cattle and breaking horses had made Daniel strong. He mounted behind her, keeping her body braced against his chest as he turned Thunder toward the Double X. "Come on, boy," he urged, gentle but quick. The horse seemed to understand the urgency of their burden, moving at a steady trot that wouldn't jostle the unconscious woman too severely. Daniel kept one arm firmly around her waist, his hand occasionally brushing the swell of her abdomen. He felt movement beneath his palm and swallowed hard. This woman wasn't just in danger, her child was too. The 10-mile ride to his ranch felt like the longest of his life. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of strong arms holding her, the rhythm of hoofbeats, and a deep voice occasionally murmuring reassurances. The pain came in waves now, and somewhere in her confused mind, she recognized what was happening. The baby was coming, far from any doctor or midwife, out here in this wilderness with only a stranger to help. When she managed to force her eyes open again, the setting sun cast long shadows across unfamiliar land. A weathered ranch house stood before them, simple but solidly built, with a barn and corral nearby. "Stay with me," the man's voice said as he carefully dismounted, still somehow managing to keep her in his arms. "We're here. You're safe now." Emma tried to speak, to thank him or warn him about the baby, but another contraction seized her, and all that emerged was a gasp of pain. "Easy now," he soothed, carrying her through the door and straight to a bedroom at the back of the house. He laid her gently on a quilt-covered bed, then hesitated, clearly uncertain. "Baby," Emma managed to gasp between contractions. "Coming." The man's face paled beneath his tan, but he nodded resolutely. "I'll fetch Mrs. Hawkins from the neighboring ranch. She's helped birth half the children in the county." "No time," Emma clutched his hand with surprising strength. "Please, don't leave." Daniel had faced down rustlers, survived blizzards, and once stood his ground against a charging bull, but nothing had ever terrified him quite like the prospect before him now. Yet something in the woman's pleading eyes steadied him. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "My name's Daniel Xavier. This is my ranch, and I give you my word, madam, I'll do everything I can for you and your child." "Emma," she whispered. "Emma O'Sullivan." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Emma. Daniel proved surprisingly capable, heating water, finding clean linens, and speaking in that steady, calming voice that somehow gave her strength when her own was failing. He'd helped birth calves and foals, he told her, and while it wasn't the same, the principles weren't so different. As the night deepened around the small ranch house, Emma's labor intensified. Daniel wiped her brow, held her hand, and encouraged her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. "You're doing fine, Emma," he assured her. "Just a little longer now." When the moment finally came, Emma gathered her remaining strength and pushed with everything she had. The room filled with a newborn's cry, strong and indignant. "A girl," Daniel announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a clean shirt. "You have a daughter, Emma." Tears streamed down Emma's face as he placed the baby in her arms. Despite her exhaustion, joy flooded through her as she gazed at her daughter's perfect face, the button nose, the rosebud mouth, and the wisps of dark hair that hinted at her father's coloring rather than Emma's fair locks. "She's beautiful," Daniel said softly, watching the pair with wonder. "Thank you," Emma whispered, looking up at this stranger who had become her savior. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us." Daniel shook his head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. Not in this harsh land where survival often depended on looking after oneself first. "What will you call her?" Daniel asked after a moment. Emma looked down at her daughter's face, already showing the determined set of jaw that would serve her well in this difficult world. "Hope," she decided. "Her name is Hope." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful all at once. As dawn broke over the Double X Ranch, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before him as he contemplated the unexpected turn his life had taken in the past 12 hours. In the bedroom, Emma and her newborn daughter slept, exhausted from their ordeal. He checked on them several times during the night, relieved to find both mother and child peaceful. Emma's color had improved, and the baby nursed strongly when she woke. Still, Daniel knew they weren't out of danger yet. Childbed fever had claimed many women, and the nearest doctor was in Redemption, a half-day's ride away. The sound of hoofbeats outside drew him from his thoughts. Rising, Daniel moved to the window, his hand automatically checking for the revolver at his hip, another habit the West had taught him. Through the glass, he recognized the approaching rider as Elijah Cooper, who ran the general store in town and sometimes delivered mail to the outlying ranches. Daniel stepped onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind him. "Morning, Illy," he called as the man dismounted. "You're out early. Wanted to catch you before you headed out to work the herd," Elijah replied, pulling an envelope from his saddlebag. "Got a letter for you from back east." "Boston postmark." Daniel accepted the letter, recognizing his sister's handwriting. "Thanks. Any news from town?" Elijah scratched his beard. "Marshall's looking for a woman, came in on yesterday's stage but never made it to town. Young, blonde, in the family way." Stagecoach driver claims she got off willingly at the crossroads, but passengers say different. They're saying he put her off when he realized her condition, didn't want to risk her having the baby in his coach. Daniel's jaw tightened. That would be Emma O'Sullivan, he said. She collapsed on the road. I found her yesterday evening. Elijah's eyes widened. She here? Is she all right? She had the baby last night, a little girl. They're both resting now. Well, I'll be. Elijah shook his head. That's a piece of luck, you finding her. Marshall will want to know. Tell him I'll bring her and the baby to town when they're strong enough to travel, Daniel said. And'll he find out who that stagecoach driver was? Man like that shouldn't be responsible for passengers. After Elijah departed, Daniel returned inside, his sister's letter momentarily forgotten as his thoughts turned to Emma. He had questions, many of them. Where was she headed? Where was her husband or the baby's father? Why was she traveling alone in her condition? But those questions could wait. For now, she needed rest and safety, and he could provide both. When he checked on her again, he found Emma awake, the baby nestled against her chest. She looked up as he entered, a tentative smile on her lips. Good morning, she said softly. I hope we haven't inconvenienced you too much. Daniel shook his head, struck again by the quiet dignity in her face despite her circumstances. No inconvenience. How are you feeling? Better, thank you. Still weak, but... She glanced down at her daughter. Stronger than I expected. Daniel pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, keeping a respectful distance. I don't mean to pry, but a rider just came by. The marshal in Redemption is looking for you. Seems there's some question about how you came to be on that road alone. Emma's face clouded. The driver, she said bitterly. He said he couldn't risk me, making a mess in his coach. When I protested, he said no decent woman would be traveling in my condition without a husband anyway. Her chin lifted defiantly, but Daniel could see the hurt behind her anger. Where were you headed? He asked gently. Redemption, she replied. I have an aunt there, my mother's sister. She wrote that I could stay with her until... Emma trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. Until I decided what to do next. Daniel nodded, reading between the lines. A young woman alone, expecting a child, seeking refuge with a distant relative. It told a story common enough in these parts, though usually whispered about rather than acknowledged openly. Your husband? He asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Emma's laugh held no humor. There never was one. Not legally, at least. She met his gaze directly, as if daring him to judge her. Thomas promised marriage. He gave me a ring, said we'd go to the preacher after he returned from his business trip. I believed him, foolishly. Daniel felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man. He didn't come back. Oh, he came back, Emma said, her voice hardening. With a wife from St. Louis. Turns out he already had a family there. I was just entertainment during his visits to our town. She looked down at Hope. When I told him about the baby, he offered money to take care of the problem. When I refused, he threatened to ruin my reputation if I ever told anyone he was the father. So you left. What choice did I have? My father disowned me. The town where I'd lived all my life suddenly had no place for me. My Aunt Harriet was the only one who offered help. Daniel was silent for a moment, processing her story. It was a tale he'd heard before women abandoned, lives appended by men who made promises they never intended to keep. The West was full of such stories, though few had happy endings. I'll take you to your aunt when you're stronger, he said finally, but there's no rush. You and Hope are welcome to stay here until you're fully recovered. Surprise flashed across Emma's face. You do that for strangers. Daniel shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her scrutiny. It's the decent thing to do. Not everyone would agree, Emma said softly. Most people see a woman in my situation and assume the worst. I'm not most people, Daniel replied, and I don't much care what others think. Something in Emma's expression softened. No, I don't suppose you do, Mr. Xavier. Daniel, he corrected. If you're staying in my home, you might as well use my given name. Daniel, she repeated, and he found he liked the way it sounded in her voice. The baby stirred, letting out a small cry, and Emma's attention immediately shifted to her daughter. As she soothed the infant, Daniel rose to leave. I need to see to the cattle, he said, but I won't go far. There's food in the kitchen when you feel up to it, and I'll check in on you both later. Emma nodded gratefully. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. As he stepped outside into the bright Texas morning, Daniel wondered at the strange turn his solitary life had taken. For 2 years, he'd lived alone on this ranch, speaking to almost no one except when business required it. Now his quiet home held a woman and her newborn child, and somehow the place already felt different. Warmer. Less empty. Shaking off the unsettling thought, Daniel headed for the corral. He had work to do, regardless of his unexpected guests. The cattle wouldn't feed themselves, and the fences on the north pasture still needed mending. Emma and her baby would be gone soon enough, back to their own lives, and his would return to normal, so why did that thought leave him feeling strangely hollow? Over the next few days, a routine developed at the Double X Ranch. Daniel rose at dawn to work with the cattle and tend to the endless chores that ranch life demanded. Emma recovered her strength gradually, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen, where she insisted on preparing meals despite Daniel's protests that she should rest. "I'm not an invalid," she told him firmly on the third morning when he found her at the stove, frying bacon and brewing coffee while Hope slept in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a wooden crate lined with blankets. "And I won't be a burden. If I'm to stay here until I'm stronger, the least I can do is cook." Daniel had to admit that having hot meals waiting when he returned to the house was a welcome change from his own rudimentary cooking. Emma moved about his kitchen with an easy grace, somehow managing to create delicious meals from his simple supplies. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in spectacular colors. Hope nestled in Emma's arms, and conversation flowed more easily than Daniel would have expected. He found himself telling her about his life in Boston, the expectations of his wealthy family that had driven him west in search of something that felt like his own achievement rather than an inheritance. "My father built a shipping empire," he explained one evening as they watched stars appear in the darkening sky. "He expected me to take over, to follow the path he'd laid out, but every success I had there felt like his, not mine. I needed to prove to myself that I could build something with my own hands." Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And have you proven it to yourself?" Daniel glanced around at his modest ranch. It wasn't much compared to his family's mansion in Boston, but it was his. "Getting there," he said. "The Double X isn't the biggest spread in Texas, but it's growing. Another few years and I'll have something to be proud of." "You should be proud already," Emma said softly. "Creating something from nothing, that takes courage." Her words warmed him more than they should have, and Daniel found himself studying her profile in the fading light. The past days had restored color to her cheeks, and with her hair loose around her shoulders rather than severely pinned up, she looked younger, more carefree than when he'd first found her. "What about you?" he asked, redirecting his thoughts. "What did you leave behind?" Emma sighed, adjusting Hope in her arms. "Not much worth missing. My father was the bank manager in a small town outside Denver, very concerned with appearances and his standing in the community. My mother died when I was 15, and after that, it was just him and me in that big, empty house. When I met Thomas, he seemed like my escape." She gave a rueful smile. "I was so eager to leave that I didn't see the warning signs." "What will you do now?" Daniel asked. "After you reach your aunt's." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Find work if I can. Save enough to make a home for Hope somewhere." She glanced down at her daughter. "I want her to have choices I never had, to be strong enough to make her own way." Daniel watched the fierce determination in Emma's face as she looked at her child and felt something shift inside him. This woman had been abandoned, betrayed, and cast out, yet here she sat, already planning how to build a future for her daughter. He'd met men twice her size with half her courage. "She will be," he said. "With you as her mother, how could she be anything else?" Emma looked up, surprised by the conviction in his voice. Their eyes met and held for a heartbeat longer than was comfortable. Daniel was the first to look away, suddenly aware of how easy it would be to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. Emma was vulnerable, dependent on his help. The last thing she needed was unwelcome attention from the man whose roof she was under. "It's getting late," he said, rising from his chair. I should check on the horses before turning in. If Emma noticed his abrupt departure, she gave no sign of it. "Good night, Daniel," she said simply. "Thank you for the company." In the days that followed, Daniel found himself increasingly drawn to Emma and her tiny daughter. He'd never considered himself particularly fond of children, but there was something about Hope's determined little fists and bright, curious eyes that fascinated him. And Emma? She brought life to his lonely ranch house, filling it with the sense of cooking, the soft lullabies she sang to Hope, and laughter that made him realize how silent his world had been before. A week after Emma's arrival, Daniel made the half-day ride to Redemption to inform her aunt of their whereabouts and to fetch supplies. Harriet Preston was a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair and suspicious eyes, but her relief at hearing of her niece's safety seemed genuine enough. "I'd nearly given her up for lost," she told Daniel as they stood outside her millinery shop. "When she didn't arrive on the stage as planned, I feared the worst." "She needs time to recover her strength," Daniel explained. "The birth was difficult and the road is rough. I thought it best to wait until they're both stronger for the journey." Harriet studied him with narrowed eyes. "Very considerate of you, Mr. Xavier. Not many men would take such responsibility for a stranger." There was a question in her statement that Daniel chose to ignore. "I'll bring them to town when the doctor says it's safe to travel," he said. "In the meantime, is there anything you'd like me to take back for them?" Harriet disappeared into her shop, returning with a small bundle of baby clothes and a letter for Emma. "Tell her I'm glad she's safe," she said as Daniel mounted his horse. "And Mr. Xavier, thank you for helping my niece. There aren't many who would have done so given her circumstances." Daniel tipped his hat. "Madam, in my experience, it's not our circumstances that define us, but how we face them. Your niece has more courage than most men I've known." As he rode back to the ranch with the supplies, Daniel found himself contemplating the future. Emma would leave soon, taking Hope to live with her aunt in town. His house would be quiet again, empty of their presence. The thought should have been a relief, a return to the independence he'd sought when he came west. Instead, it left him oddly melancholy. He'd grown accustomed to their company, to the simple pleasure of shared meals and conversation. More than that, he'd grown to admire Emma's resilience, her quiet strength, and the gentle way she cared for her daughter despite her own hardships. And Hope. He'd never imagined he could become so attached to an infant in such a short time, but they weren't his to keep. Emma had her own path to follow, her own life to rebuild. The best thing he could do was help her get safely to her aunt's, and then step back, allowing her the independence she clearly valued as much as he valued his own. Still, as the double X came into view, with smoke curling from the chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows, Daniel couldn't deny the warmth that spread through him at the sight. For the first time since he'd built the place, it looked like a home. Emma stood at the stove, stirring a pot of stew while humming softly to Hope, who was awake but content in her cradle nearby. The week at the ranch had done wonders for her strength, both physical and emotional. Away from judgmental eyes, with plenty of rest and good food, she'd begun to feel more like herself again, or perhaps a new version of herself, one shaped by the trials she'd endured but not defined by them. She'd also begun to see Daniel Xavier in a different light than she had initially. At first, he'd been simply her rescuer, a kind stranger who'd helped her in her moment of greatest need. But as the days passed, she'd glimpsed the man beneath the reserved exterior, intelligent, principled, and possessing a dry wit that occasionally surfaced when he was most relaxed. And he was good with Hope, awkward at first but increasingly confident as he learned to hold her tiny body. Emma had caught him speaking softly to the baby when he thought she was napping, telling Hope about the cattle and the land as if the infant could understand every word. The tenderness in his expression during those moments stirred something in Emma that she'd thought died with Thomas's betrayal, the ability to trust, to see goodness in a man's heart. But she knew better than to let such feelings take root. Daniel had been kind, yes, but that didn't mean he had any interest in a woman with another man's child. He'd made no advances, shown no sign that he saw her as anything but a temporary guest in his home. And even if he had, Emma wasn't sure she was ready to risk her heart again, not when the wounds from Thomas's betrayal were still so raw. The sound of hoofbeats outside pulled her from her thoughts. Setting aside the spoon, Emma moved to the window, smiling as she recognized Daniel returning from town. He dismounted with his usual fluid grace, his tall form silhouetted against the setting sun as he led his horse toward the barn. Emma returned to the stove, adding a pinch of salt to the stew and checking the cornbread baking in the oven. By the time Daniel entered the house, stomping dust from his boots on the porch, dinner was ready. "Welcome back," she called. "You're just in time to eat." Daniel appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands and an unreadable expression on his face. "Something smells good," he said, but there was a distracted quality to his voice. Emma studied him as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Is everything all right? Did you see my aunt?" "Yes," Daniel nodded, moving to wash his hands in the basin. "She sends her regards, and these." He gestured to the bundle he'd set on the table. "Some things for Hope." Emma unwrapped the package, finding several tiny gowns and a soft knitted blanket. Beneath them was a letter addressed in her aunt's precise handwriting. "Thank you for delivering these," she said, setting the letter aside to read later. Was she very worried, concerned? Daniel admitted, taking his seat at the table as Emma served the stew. "But relieved to hear you're both safe." Emma sat across from him, automatically checking that Hope was still content before turning her attention to her own meal. "Did you tell her when to expect us?" There was a slight pause before Daniel answered. "I said it would depend on when the doctor thought you were strong enough to travel." "Doctor?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "I haven't seen a doctor." "You will tomorrow," Daniel said, focusing intently on his stew. "I stopped by Dr. Wilson's office in town. He's agreed to ride out here to check on you and Hope in the morning." Emma set down her spoon, surprised. "That's very thoughtful, but is it necessary? We're both doing well, and I'm sure the journey to town wouldn't be too taxing now." Daniel's expression turned stubborn. "Childbirth isn't something to take lightly, Emma. I've seen women seem fine at first, then develop a fever days later. The doctor should check you both before you travel." His concern was touching, if perhaps excessive. "All right," Emma conceded. "But after that, if he says we're healthy, I should go to my aunt's. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Something flashed in Daniel's eyes, disappointment, resignation. It was gone too quickly for Emma to be sure. "You're not an imposition," he said quietly. "But yes, if the doctor gives his approval, I'll take you to town the following day." They ate in silence for a few moments, an unusual tension hanging in the air between them. Emma searched for a way to dispel it. "How are things in town?" she asked finally. "Any news?" Daniel seemed to welcome the change of subject. The usual gossip. New settlers arriving almost weekly now that the railroad's coming through. The marshal caught those bank robbers they've been after. And Widow Jenkins has decided the town needs a proper church, not just services in the schoolhouse. Emma smiled, imagining the bustling little town she'd glimpsed briefly from the stagecoach. "It sounds like a good place." "Growing," Daniel agreed, "not as rough as some towns out here." He hesitated, then added, "Your aunt seems well respected. Her shop was busy while I was there." "That's good to hear," Emma said, though privately she wondered what kind of reception awaited her in redemption. Would the townspeople accept her, an unwed mother, or would she find the same judgment and whispers that had driven her from her home in Colorado? As if reading her thoughts, Daniel said, "Redemption's not a bad town, Emma. People there mostly mind their own business. Those who don't, well, they're not worth worrying about." Emma appreciated his attempt at reassurance, but experience had taught her that people's opinions could make life very difficult, especially for a woman alone. Still, she had hoped to think of now. Her daughter deserved a stable home, not a life on the road. "I'm sure we'll be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And it will be good to finally meet my aunt in person. We've only ever corresponded by letter." Daniel seemed about to say something more, but at that moment, Hope let out a wail from her cradle. Emma rose immediately to tend to her, lifting the baby and cradling her against her shoulder. "Someone's hungry," she said with a fond smile. "Excuse me." She carried Hope to the bedroom, giving Daniel privacy to finish his meal while she nursed her daughter. As Hope's tiny mouth latched on, Emma gazed down at her perfect face, marveling as she did each time at the miracle of this new life. "What will our life be like in town, little one?" she whispered. "Will we find a place to belong?" Hope's only answer was to continue nursing contentedly, her tiny hand resting against Emma's breast. But as Emma glanced toward the door, thinking of the man on the other side, she couldn't help wondering if they might already have found that place if only circumstances were different. The following morning brought Dr. Wilson, a gruff but kindly man in his 60s who examined both Emma and Hope with professional efficiency. Daniel waited on the porch, pacing nervously until the doctor emerged from the bedroom with a satisfied nod. "Mother and child are doing remarkably well, considering the circumstances," he announced. "You did good work delivering that baby, Xavier. Not many men would have kept their heads in that situation." Daniel shrugged off the praise. "Emma did all the hard work, I just helped," the doctor chuckled. Modest as always. He glanced back toward the bedroom. "She's a strong woman. The baby's thriving, 2 good lungs, healthy color. With proper care, they'll both be fine." "So they can travel safely?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the sinking feeling in his chest. "Doctor." Wilson stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I'd prefer they wait another week, to be honest. The birth was uncomplicated, but she lost blood and the journey could be taxing. Still, if necessary, they could make the trip to town tomorrow without serious risk." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll tell her." "Thank you for coming all this way, Doc. Happy to help." The doctor picked up his bag. "One more thing, Xavier. That young woman in there, she's going to need friends in redemption. There are still those who look down on a woman in her situation, no matter the circumstances." "I know," Daniel said grimly. "Rest assured she won't face that alone." After seeing the doctor off, Daniel returned inside to find Emma in the kitchen, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Emma looked up expectantly. "Well, did the doctor pronounce us fit to travel?" Daniel hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "He said you could make the journey tomorrow if necessary, but he'd prefer you wait another week to regain more strength." Emma's expression turned thoughtful. "I see, and what do you think?" The question caught Daniel off guard. "Me? Yes, you." Emma smiled slightly. "You've been watching over us for more than a week now. I value your opinion." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. Part of him, a selfish part he wasn't proud of, wanted to emphasize the doctor's concerns, to keep Emma and Hope at the ranch as long as possible. But that wouldn't be fair to Emma, who deserved the truth. "I think you should do what feels right," he said finally. "You know your own strength better than anyone. If you feel ready to go to your aunt's, I'll take you tomorrow. If you'd prefer to wait, you're welcome to stay." Emma was silent for a long moment, her eyes studying his face as if searching for something. Daniel held her gaze steadily, though it took effort not to reveal how much he hoped she would choose to stay. "I think," she said slowly, "that another week of rest would be wise." "If you're certain we're not imposing." Relief flooded through Daniel, though he tried not to show it. "Not at all. The ranch is quieter when you're both here, actually." Emma raised an eyebrow. "A baby makes things quieter?" "Well, not literally," Daniel admitted with a small smile. "But having you both here, it makes the place feel more like a home, I suppose, less like just somewhere I sleep between working the cattle." The words slipped out before he could consider their implications, and Daniel immediately wished he could take them back. The last thing he wanted was for Emma to think he had designs on her to make her uncomfortable in any way, but Emma didn't seem offended. Instead, a soft expression crossed her face. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. "This past week has been peaceful. Despite everything, I've felt safe here. Hope has too." Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding that needed no words. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to imagine what it might be like if Emma and Hope stayed permanently, if the temporary arrangement became something more. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, but reality intruded as Hope stirred in her cradle, breaking the moment. Emma turned her attention to her daughter, and Daniel stepped back, reminding himself of boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. I should check the north pasture fence, he said, already moving toward the door. Storms last week might have damaged it. Emma nodded, not looking up from Hope. Be careful out there. The simple domestic exchange, so ordinary yet so unfamiliar to him, stayed with Daniel as he rode out across his land. It had been a long time since anyone had cared whether he was careful, since anyone had been waiting for his return at the end of the day. As he mended fences under the hot Texas sun, Daniel couldn't help but wonder if he was setting himself up for heartbreak. Emma had given no indication that she saw him as anything more than a kind stranger who had helped her in her time of need. And even if she did feel something more, was she ready for it? The wounds from Thomas's betrayal were still fresh, and she had a newborn daughter to consider. Daniel drove a nail into a fence post with more force than necessary. He was getting ahead of himself, imagining feelings and possibilities that might not exist. The sensible thing would be to help Emma get settled in town, ensure she and Hope were provided for, and then step back, maintaining a friendly but distant relationship. That was the sensible thing. But as he turned his horse back toward the ranch house in the late afternoon, seeing smoke from the chimney and knowing Emma would be there, Daniel wondered if his heart would listen to sense. The additional week at the Double X passed too quickly for Emma's liking. Though she knew she should be eager to reach her aunt's home and begin establishing their new life, she found herself reluctant to leave the ranch that had become a sanctuary. Each morning, she woke dreading that it was their last day there, only to feel relief when it wasn't. Part of her attachment, she knew, was to the peace and safety the isolated ranch provided. Here, there were no judging eyes, no whispers behind her back, no need to explain or defend herself. But increasingly, Emma had to admit that a larger part of her reluctance to leave was tied to Daniel himself. In the 10 days since he'd found her on the road, Emma had come to see the quiet rancher as more than just her rescuer. She'd glimpsed the depth of character beneath his reserved exterior, his unfailing kindness, his dry humor, the intelligence that showed in his thoughtful conversations about books and politics. And she'd noticed other things too. The grace with which his tall form moved as he worked around the ranch, the strength in his hands that could be so gentle when holding Hope, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he truly smiled. Such observations were dangerous, Emma knew. She'd trusted too easily before, seen what she wanted to see in Thomas rather than the reality. She couldn't afford to make the same mistake again, not with Hope depending on her for everything. Yet Daniel was nothing like Thomas. Where Thomas had been smooth-talking and charming, always ready with flattery and grand promises, Daniel was straightforward and honest. He offered help without fanfare, kept his word without exception, and never asked for anything in return. And the way he looked at Hope with a mixture of wonder and protectiveness spoke of a depth of feeling Thomas had never possessed. On their final evening at the ranch, Emma put Hope down to sleep early, then joined Daniel on the porch as had become their custom. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby meadow. "It's so beautiful here," Emma said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I'll miss this view." Daniel glanced at her, his expression hard to read in the fading light. "You can come back to visit," he said. "Anytime, both of you." Emma smiled, touched by the offer. "Thank you, I might take you up on that when Hope is a bit older." They fell silent again, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Emma was acutely aware of Daniel beside her, of the narrow space between their chairs, of all the things that remained unsaid between them. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you properly for everything you've done, not just saving our lives, but making us feel welcome, making me feel—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Respected, even knowing my situation." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Your situation doesn't define you, Emma. The choices you've made, the strength you've shown, that's what matters." His words warmed her, but Emma shook her head slightly. "Not everyone sees it that way. In town, people will talk, they'll make assumptions." "Let them," Daniel said, a surprising fierceness in his voice. Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth your concern. Emma studied his face in the dim light, struck by the intensity in his eyes. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, he insisted. Not easy, but simple. You deserve respect, Emma, you and Hope both. Something in his tone made Emma's heart beat faster. Why do you care so much? She asked softly. We're strangers who arrived on your doorstep. You owe us nothing. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Maybe I was alone too long out here, or maybe finding you on that road was more than just chance. I don't know. He took a deep breath. All I know is that having you and Hope here has made this place feel like something it never was before. The vulnerability in his admission touched Emma deeply. And what was that? A home, he said simply. Not just a house, but a home. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. Emma felt a longing rise within her, not just for physical security, but for emotional connection, for partnership, for the kind of home they'd briefly created together on this ranch. But fear held her back, fear of trusting too soon, of making another mistake, of risking not just her own heart but Hope's future as well. I should check on Hope, she said, rising abruptly from her chair. We have an early start tomorrow. If Daniel was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. He simply nodded, standing as well. Of course, I'll have the wagon ready after breakfast. Emma paused at the door, looking back at him. In the silver moonlight, his profile was strong and steady, like the man himself. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emma, he replied softly. Sleep well. Inside, after checking that Hope was still sleeping peacefully, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts in turmoil. Tomorrow they would leave this sanctuary for an unknown reception in Redemption. She would meet the aunt she knew only through letters, begin building a new life in a town of strangers. It was what she had planned, what she had been working toward when the stagecoach driver abandoned her on that dusty road. So why did it suddenly feel like she was leaving something precious behind? The journey to Redemption took most of the morning. Daniel had insisted on using the wagon rather than horseback, making a comfortable seat for Emma with blankets and pillows, and securing Hope's cradle so it wouldn't jostle too much on the rough road. Emma appreciated his thoughtfulness, though the ride was still tiring. They spoke little during the journey, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma kept Hope close, nursing her when needed and marveling at how the tiny girl seemed to take the journey in stride, sleeping through most of it despite the bumps and jolts. As they approached the outskirts of town, Emma felt her anxiety rising. Redemption was larger than she'd expected, not a major city by any means, but a proper town with several streets of businesses, a church with a white steeple, and neat houses spreading outward from the main thoroughfare. Daniel seemed to sense her nervousness. Your aunt's shop is on Main Street, he said, pointing ahead. It's one of the better businesses in town. She's done well for herself. Emma nodded, adjusting Hope in her arms as the wagon rolled down the dusty Main Street. People glanced their way, some with open curiosity, others with the casual interest small towns always showed to arriving wagons. Emma felt exposed under their gazes, wondering if they could somehow tell her story just by looking at her. Daniel stopped the wagon in front of a neat storefront with Preston's Millinery painted in elegant letters on the window. Before he could help her down, the door opened, and a woman in her 50s emerged, her gray-streaked hair pinned severely beneath a modest hat. Emma. The woman called, approaching the wagon. Is that you? Emma summoned a smile. Aunt Harriet. Yes, it's me, and this is Hope. Harriet Preston's face softened slightly at the sight of the baby, though her posture remained rigid. Thank God you're safe when you didn't arrive on the stage. She shook her head, then turned her attention to Daniel. Mr. Xavier, thank you for bringing them safely. Daniel tipped his hat. My pleasure, madam. Let me help with their things. While Daniel unloaded the few belongings, Emma had her satchel, Hope's cradle, and the baby things Harriet had sent Emma carefully descended from the wagon, still holding Hope close. Come inside, Harriet said, eyeing the growing number of onlookers with disapproval. No need to give the gossips more fodder than necessary. The millinery shop was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside, smelling pleasantly of fabric and the subtle scent of flowers that seemed to emanate from Harriet herself. Through a door at the back, Emma glimpsed a tidy living area, her aunt's home above the shop. "I've prepared a room for you upstairs," Harriet said, leading the way. "It's small, but it should suffice for you and the child." Daniel followed with Emma's satchel and the cradle, his tall frame seeming out of place among the delicate hats and ribbons of the shop. As they reached the living quarters, Harriet turned to him with a polite but dismissive smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Xavier. I'm sure you have business to attend to in town. I can help my niece settle in from here." It was a clear dismissal, and Emma saw Daniel's jaw tighten slightly, though his expression remained polite. "Of course," he said. He set down Emma's belongings, then turned to her, hesitating. "If you need anything, either of you, the offer stands. Anytime." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." For a moment it seemed he might say more, but instead he simply nodded, his eyes conveying what words could not. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden stairs as he descended to the shop below. Harriet watched him go with narrowed eyes before turning back to Emma. "Well," she said briskly, "let me show you your room. You must be exhausted from the journey." The room was indeed small but neat, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the main street. Harriet had added a small crib in the corner, plainly made but sturdy. "It's perfect," Emma said sincerely. "Thank you for taking us in, Aunt Harriet." "I know it can't be easy given the circumstances." Harriet's expression softened slightly. "Family is family," she said. "Your mother would have wanted me to help you." She glanced at Hope, who was awake now, her bright eyes taking in the new surroundings. "May I?" Emma carefully transferred Hope to her aunt's arms. Harriet held the baby with surprising expertise, studying her tiny face with an expression that mixed sternness with reluctant affection. "She has your eyes," she observed, "but not your coloring." "No," Emma agreed quietly. "She takes after her father in that regard." Harriet's lips thinned at the mention of the absent father, but she said nothing, returning Hope to Emma's arms. "Rest now," she said. "We can talk more at supper. I close the shop at 6. Left alone with Hope, Emma sat in the rocking chair by the window, gazing out at the bustling street below. It was strange to be surrounded by people again after the isolation of the ranch. Strange, too, to be in her aunt's home, under her somewhat austere protection rather than the quiet companionship she'd grown accustomed to with Daniel. As if summoned by her thoughts, she spotted him across the street, loading supplies into his wagon outside the general store. Even from a distance, his tall figure was unmistakable. Emma watched him work, the efficient movements, the way he stopped to exchange words with passers-by. He seemed to be respected here, she noted, though not particularly social. Just as he finished loading the wagon, Daniel looked up, his gaze finding her window as if he'd somehow sensed her watching. The distance was too great to read his expression, but he raised a hand in a small gesture of farewell. Emma lifted her own hand in response, Hope cradled in her other arm. Then Daniel climbed onto the wagon seat, took up the reins, and drove away, heading back to his ranch and out of their lives. Except, Emma realized as a profound sense of loss washed over her, she didn't want him out of their lives, not completely. Not yet. But what she wanted and what was possible were two different things. For now, she needed to focus on establishing herself in redemption, on building a secure future for Hope. Romance, even the possibility of it, would have to wait. With a sigh, Emma turned from the window and began unpacking her few belongings, trying to ignore the emptiness that had nothing to do with the small, unfamiliar room. Life in redemption quickly fell into a routine for Emma. Harriet, while not demonstrative, proved to be a fair and helpful guardian, offering advice on caring for Hope and helping Emma navigate the social complexities of small-town life. The millinery shop provided a modest income for Harriet, and she soon put Emma to work as well, teaching her to trim hats and manage customer orders. The town's reaction to Emma and Hope was mixed, as she had expected. Some women were openly sympathetic, bringing small gifts for the baby and offering friendship to Emma. Others were politely distant, curious but cautious. A few were openly judgmental, their whispers following Emma when she took Hope for walks or attended church services with Harriet. "Pay them no mind," Harriet advised when Emma returned from the general store one day, upset after overhearing two women speculating about Hope's father. "Their opinions matter only if you let them." It was sound advice, similar to what Daniel had told her, but sometimes easier said than followed. Emma tried to focus on those who showed kindness, like Mrs. Wilson, the doctor's wife, who often stopped by with hand-me-down baby clothes, or young Sarah Cooper from the general store, who seemed genuinely interested in friendship. Daniel's name came up occasionally in town conversations, usually in reference to his ranch or his occasional business in town. Emma listened carefully during these mentions, but revealed nothing of their connection beyond the bare facts that were already known, that he had found her on the road and helped deliver hope. She had expected him to visit the millinery when he came to town, but 3 weeks passed with no sign of him. Emma told herself it was for the best. Distance would help her gain perspective, would allow her to focus on building their new life without complications, but she missed him. Missed their evening conversations on the porch, the quiet understanding that had grown between them, the way Hope seemed content in his arms when he awkwardly but carefully held her. Sometimes at night, rocking Hope to sleep in the small room above the millinery, Emma found herself wondering what Daniel was doing at that moment, whether he too was watching the stars and thinking of them. Nearly a month after their arrival in Redemption, Emma was working in the shop when the bell over the door jingled. Looking up from the hat she was trimming, she felt her heart skip as Daniel entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice as steady as ever, though his eyes betrayed his pleasure at seeing her. "I was hoping to find you here." Emma set aside her work, suddenly conscious of her plain work dress and hair pulled back in a simple knot. "Daniel, it's good to see you." A small smile touched his lips. "You too, both of you. How is Hope?" "Growing every day," Emma replied, warmth filling her at his genuine interest. "She's upstairs sleeping. Harriet is watching her while I work." Daniel nodded, glancing around the empty shop. "Business good, steady," Emma said. "Harriet has loyal customers, and she's teaching me the trade." A moment of awkward silence fell between them, so unlike the comfortable quiet they had shared at the ranch. Emma searched for something more to say, something that wouldn't reveal how often she'd thought of him. "What brings you to town?" she asked finally. "Supplies, partly," Daniel admitted, "but mainly I wanted to check on you both, make sure you were settling in all right." The simple honesty of his answer touched Emma. "That's kind of you. We're doing well. Redemption is." "It's a good town, mostly." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mostly?" Emma shrugged, unwilling to burden him with the occasional slights she'd endured. "Every town has its share of gossips. It's nothing I didn't expect." "Names would be helpful," Daniel said, only half joking. "I could have a word." The idea of Daniel confronting her detractors made Emma smile despite herself. That would only give them more to talk about, but thank you for the offer. Another silence fell, this one charged with unspoken feelings. Daniel shifted his hat in his hands, a rare sign of nervousness from the usually composed rancher. "Emma, I was wondering," he began, just as the shop bell jingled again. Harriet entered from the back room, Hope cradled in her arms. "Emma, she's awake and hungry." She stopped short at the sight of Daniel. "Mr. Xavier, this is a surprise." "Mrs. Preston," Daniel nodded politely. "Just in town on business. Thought I'd stop by to see how Emma and Hope are faring." Harriet's expression was polite but reserved as she handed Hope to Emma. "Very thoughtful. As you can see, they're thriving." Emma cradled Hope close, her heart swelling as Daniel's face softened at the sight of the baby. Hope had grown in the month since he'd last seen her, her features more defined, her dark hair thicker. "She's beautiful," Daniel said softly, "has your eyes." The tenderness in his voice made Emma's throat tighten. "Would you like to hold her before I feed her?" Daniel glanced at Harriet, whose disapproval was subtle but unmistakable, then back at Emma. "I'd be honored." Emma carefully transferred Hope to his arms. Despite the time that had passed, Daniel held her with the same gentle confidence he'd developed during their stay at the ranch. Hope looked up at him, her tiny face solemn as if trying to place this familiar stranger. "Hello, little one," Daniel murmured. "You've grown." To Emma's delight, Hope's face broke into a toothless smile, her tiny hands reaching up toward Daniel's face. "She remembers you," Emma said, surprised and touched. Daniel smiled back at the baby, genuine joy lighting his features. "Smart girl." Harriet cleared her throat. "Emma, perhaps you should take Hope upstairs. She needs feeding, and I'm sure Mr. Xavier has other business in town." The reminder of propriety and responsibilities broke the moment. Daniel carefully returned Hope to Emma's arms, his fingers brushing against hers in the transfer. "Yes, of course," he said, stepping back. "I should be getting back to the ranch before dark anyway." Emma wanted to protest, to ask him to stay longer, but Harriet's presence made that impossible. "It was good to see you, Daniel. You too." He settled his hat back on his head, then hesitated. "Emma, I was going to ask, there's a social at the church next Saturday, a picnic and dancing. I wondered if you might consider attending. With me." The invitation caught Emma by surprise. A social gathering was a public statement of interest, far different from their private interactions at the ranch. Before she could respond, Harriet stepped forward. "I'm afraid Emma will be quite busy with shop duties," she said firmly. "The summer season brings many orders." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his expression remained polite. "Perhaps another time then." "Perhaps," Emma said quickly, unwilling to let Harriet answer for her. "Thank you for thinking of us, Daniel," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Anytime. Good day, ladies." As the door closed behind him, Emma turned to her aunt, unable to hide her frustration. "Aunt Harriet, I can speak for myself." "If I want to attend the social, Emma," Harriet cut her off, her voice low but firm. "Think about what you're doing. You've barely been in town a month. Your situation is already delicate. To be seen openly courting, especially with a man like Xavier, would only fuel gossip." "A man like Daniel." Emma repeated. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Harriet sighed, her expression softening slightly. "He seems decent enough, I grant you, but he's a solitary man, Emma. Lives alone on that ranch miles from town, rarely socializes. There are stories about why he left Boston, why he keeps to himself." "Stories spread by the same people who whisper about me," Emma challenged. "Perhaps," Harriet conceded, "but my concern is for you and Hope. You need stability, respectability. Xavier may have been kind when you needed help, but that doesn't mean he's offering anything permanent. Men sometimes get ideas about women in your situation." The implication stung, but Emma recognized the genuine concern beneath her aunt's words. Harriet had taken them in, given them a home and protection. She owed her aunt at least the courtesy of considering her advice. "I understand your concern," Emma said finally, "but Daniel has been nothing but respectful. He delivered my child, Aunt Harriet. He could have left us by the road, but instead he took us in, cared for us, expected nothing in return." Hope began to fuss in her arms, reminding Emma of more immediate needs. "I should feed her," she said, turning toward the stairs. "We can discuss this later." In the privacy of her room, as Hope nursed contentedly, Emma gazed out the window at the street below. Daniel's wagon was no longer in sight. He must have completed his business and headed back to the ranch. The thought of him returning to that empty house, with no one to share the evening meal or watch the sunset, filled her with an unexpected sadness. Harriet's warning echoed in her mind. Was she being foolish, reading too much into Daniel's kindness? Was her attraction to him merely gratitude or a desire for security for herself and Hope? No, Emma decided firmly. What she felt for Daniel went beyond gratitude. During those days at the ranch, she had come to know him, his integrity, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness with Hope. The connection between them had been real, not imagined, and now he had invited her to the social, a public declaration of interest that must have been difficult for such a private man. The fact that he had made the effort, despite the risk of town gossip, spoke volumes. Hope finished nursing and dozed off in Emma's arms, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. Looking down at her daughter, Emma made a decision. She wouldn't let fear or others' opinions dictate her choices again. She had done that once with Thomas, seeking her father's approval and the town's acceptance, ignoring her own instincts. This time would be different. This time, she would follow her heart. The week passed slowly for Emma, each day bringing new determination to attend the social despite Harriet's continued objections. She said nothing to her aunt, focusing instead on her work in the shop and caring for Hope, but inwardly she planned. On Saturday morning, while Harriet was occupied with a demanding customer, Emma approached Sarah Cooper, who had stopped by to deliver ribbons from her father's store. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I need a favor." The younger woman's eyes lit with interest. "Of course, Emma, what can I do?" "The church social today I'd like to attend, but Aunt Harriet is reluctant. Would you be willing to come by later and invite us both? She might agree if the invitation comes from you." Sarah's smile was knowing. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Mr. Xavier asking after you at the store yesterday, would it?" Emma felt her cheeks warm. "He mentioned the social when he visited the shop earlier this week." "I knew it," Sarah exclaimed, then lowered her voice as Harriet glanced their way. "The whole town's been wondering when he'd make his interest known. It's so romantic, the way he found you on the road and delivered your baby." Emma blinked, surprised by Sarah's interpretation of events and the apparent town interest. "It's not quite like that," she protested weakly. "Isn't it?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "He barely came to town before, and now he's here twice in 1 week, asking about you at every stop." She grinned. "Don't worry, I'll come by at 3. I'll convince your aunt." True to her word, Sarah appeared at the millinery shop just after 3 o'clock, dressed in her Sunday best and bubbling with enthusiasm about the social. To Emma's surprise, Harriet offered only token resistance before agreeing that they could attend for an hour or so. "It will be good for you to meet more of the townspeople," Harriet conceded as they walked home to change. "And I suppose people will talk regardless of what we do." Emma suspected Sarah's mention that Reverend Miller specifically hoped to see them there had influenced her aunt's decision more than any other factor, but she didn't question the victory. By 4:30, they were headed to the church grounds, Hope securely bundled in Emma's arms despite the warm June afternoon. The social was already in full swing when they arrived, with tables laden with food, children playing games on the lawn, and a small group of musicians tuning instruments for dancing later. Emma scanned the crowd anxiously, looking for Daniel's tall figure among the townspeople. Her heart sank when she didn't immediately spot him. Had he changed his mind, or had he never expected her to come, given Harriet's clear disapproval? "Emma, Mrs. Preston?" Sarah hurried over to greet them, her father following more sedately behind. "I'm so glad you came. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions and small talk. Emma found herself pleasantly surprised by the warm welcome from many of the townspeople, though she was acutely aware of curious glances and whispered comments from others. Hope, thankfully, was on her best behavior, dozing contentedly in Emma's arms and earning admiring coos from the women who stopped to admire her. Harriet stayed close, her protective presence both reassuring and slightly stifling. They had just helped themselves to lemonade when a murmur went through the crowd near the church gate. Emma turned to look and felt her breath catch. Daniel had arrived, and the sight of him momentarily stunned her. Gone was the practical rancher in dusty work clothes. In his place stood a gentleman in a well-cut dark suit, white shirt and string tie, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, clearly not accustomed to such formal attire. His eyes scanned the gathering, stopping when they found Emma. A smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features, and he began making his way toward her. "He cleans up well," Sarah whispered in Emma's ear. "No wonder half the unmarried women in town have tried to catch his eye." Emma hardly heard her, too caught up in the way Daniel moved through the crowd, nodding politely to greetings but clearly focused on reaching her. "Emma," he said when he finally stood before her, "you came." The simple statement held such quiet pleasure that Emma couldn't help smiling in return. Yes, Sarah was kind enough to extend a personal invitation. Daniel glanced at Sarah with newfound appreciation. "I'm in your debt, Miss Cooper," Sarah beamed. "Not at all, Mr. Xavier. I'm just happy to see friends enjoying the social." She tactfully excused herself, pulling her father along to greet other guests. Daniel turned his attention to Harriet, who watched the exchange with barely concealed disapproval. "Mrs. Preston, thank you for accompanying your niece today," Mr. Xavier, Harriet acknowledged stiffly. "You're not often seen at town gatherings." "No," he agreed, "but some occasions merit the effort." His eyes returned to Emma, the meaning in them clear. He had come for her, despite his discomfort with crowds and socializing. Hope chose that moment to wake, fussing slightly in Emma's arms. Daniel's face softened as he looked at the baby. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Emma transferred Hope to him, aware of the curious glances this action drew from nearby townspeople. Daniel held the baby with practiced ease now, cradling her against his chest as he spoke softly to her. "You've grown so much, little one. Been keeping your mama busy, I imagine." Hope gazed up at him, her tiny face solemn for a moment, before breaking into a gummy smile that made Daniel's eyes crinkle with answering joy. Watching them, Emma felt something in her heart shift and settle. This man, this good, kind man, had no obligation to care for her child, yet he clearly did. That meant more to her than any declaration of feelings for herself ever could. "The dancing will be starting soon," Daniel said, looking up from Hope to meet Emma's eyes. "Would you honor me with the first dance?" Before Emma could respond, Harriet stepped forward. "Perhaps Emma should stay with Hope. The baby might become upset with all the noise." "I'd be happy to watch little Hope," offered Mrs. Wilson, who had approached unnoticed. "I've been hoping for a chance to hold her again." Harriet opened her mouth to object, but Emma spoke first. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, that's very kind." She turned to Daniel. "I'd be delighted to dance with you." Daniel carefully transferred Hope to Mrs. Wilson's experienced hands, then offered his arm to Emma. As they walked toward the area cleared for dancing, Emma was acutely aware of the eyes following them, of the whispers that would surely follow. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "People will talk." Daniel's expression was serene. "Let them. I've never much cared for others' opinions, Emma. What matters is what you think, what you feel." The musicians struck up a lively tune, and other couples began to form on the makeshift dance floor. Daniel led Emma into the dance with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. "You dance well," Emma observed as they moved through the steps of the Virginia reel. "My mother insisted on lessons," Daniel admitted with a wry smile. "Said no son of hers would embarrass her at Boston society functions. It's been years since I've had occasion to use the skill." They came together again in the pattern of the dance, his hand warm against hers. "I'm glad you remembered," Emma said. As the dance continued, Emma gradually became less conscious of watching eyes and whispered comments. Instead, she focused on the joy of movement, on Daniel's steady presence, on the growing certainty that what she felt for him was real and lasting. When the music ended, they found themselves at the edge of the dancing area, near a stand of oak trees that provided some privacy from the main gathering. Daniel kept her hand in his expression turning serious. "Emma," he began, "there's something I need to say to you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes, these past weeks, since you and Hope left the ranch." He paused, searching for words. "The place hasn't been the same, I haven't been the same." Emma swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "Daniel, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know your situation is complicated. You're just beginning to establish yourself here and Hope needs stability. I understand if friendship is all you can offer right now." "Is that what you want?" Emma asked softly. "Friendship," Daniel's eyes held her steadily. "No," he admitted. "What I want is to wake up each morning and know you and Hope are there, to build a life together if you'll have me. But I'll accept whatever you're willing to give, Emma, even if that's just the chance to see you occasionally when I come to town." The raw honesty in his words moved Emma deeply. This was no smooth, talking seduction like Thomas's, no empty promises or grand declarations. This was a man offering his heart plainly and without artifice. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "when Thomas abandoned me, I thought I'd never trust again. I was so afraid of being hurt, afraid of making another mistake. But you," she took a deep breath, "you've shown me what a good man truly is, not with words, but with actions. The way you cared for Hope and me when we needed help the most. The way you've respected my choices, even when they took us away from you." Hope's distant cry caught her attention momentarily, but Emma could see Mrs. Wilson soothing her, Harriet hovering nearby with a concerned expression. "She'll be fine for a few more minutes," Daniel assured her, following her gaze. Mrs. Wilson raised 6 children of her own. Emma nodded, turning back to him. "What I'm trying to say, Daniel, is that I feel the same way. The ranch felt more like home in those few days than anywhere I've lived before, and it wasn't just the place, it was you." Hope in Daniel's face made her heart swell. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to see where this leads," Emma clarified. "For Hope's sake as much as my own, I can't rush into anything, but I don't want just friendship, Daniel, not anymore." Daniel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. "We can take this as slowly as you need, Emma. I'm not going anywhere." From across the churchyard, Emma could see Harriet watching them with a mixture of concern and resignation. There would be obstacles ahead: her aunt's disapproval, town gossip, the practical challenges of building a life together. But looking at Daniel's face, Emma felt a certainty she had never known before. This was right. This was real. And for the first time since discovering she was carrying Hope, Emma felt not just safe, but hopeful about the future. As July turned to August, Emma and Daniel settled into a careful courtship under the watchful eyes of redemption. Daniel rode into town twice weekly, sometimes staying just long enough for dinner with Emma and Harriet, other times taking Emma and Hope for drives in his wagon or picnics by the creek outside town. Harriet remained reserved but gradually stopped objecting to these outings, especially after Reverend Miller made a point of expressing his approval of Daniel's honorable intentions toward Emma and Hope. "At least he's conducting himself properly," Harriet admitted grudgingly after Daniel had formally asked her permission to court Emma. "And Hope does seem attached to him." It was true. At 4 months old, Hope lit up whenever Daniel entered the room, reaching for him with chubby hands and rewarding him with toothless smiles that never failed to soften his expression. He brought her small gifts: a handcrafted wooden rattle, a tiny stuffed horse, and spoke to her as seriously as he would to any adult, telling her about the ranch and the animals while she gazed at him with solemn attention. For Emma, watching Daniel with Hope eased the lingering fear that she was rushing into another mistake. This was a man who cared not just for her, but for her child, a child who wasn't his by blood but who he treated with such natural tenderness that strangers often assumed he was Hope's father. By September, the town's interest in their courtship had faded into acceptance. Emma had established herself as a skilled milliner in her own right, taking on more responsibility in Harriet's shop and earning the respect of customers who initially came out of curiosity but returned for her craftsmanship. On a crisp Saturday in early October, Daniel arrived at the millinery not in his usual wagon but on horseback, leading a second, gentle mare. "I thought we might ride out to the ranch today," he suggested when Emma met him at the door. "If you're comfortable leaving Hope with your aunt for a few hours." Harriet, who had been listening from behind the counter, stepped forward. "Hope and I will be fine," she said, surprising Emma with her ready agreement. "It's good for the child to bond with her, with Mr. Xavier." The near slip wasn't lost on either Emma or Daniel, but they tactfully ignored it. Harriet had been careful never to refer to Daniel as anything more than Emma's suitor, certainly not as any kind of father figure to Hope. That she had almost done so now suggested a softening in her attitude that Emma found encouraging. After feeding Hope and leaving detailed instructions with Harriet, Emma changed into her riding skirt and joined Daniel outside. He helped her mount the gentle mare, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "It's been years since I've ridden," Emma admitted as they set off. "My father thought it unladylike," Daniel smiled. "You're a natural," he assured her as she quickly found her balance. And Thunder's sister here is the gentlest horse on the ranch. I've been training her specially. Emma raised an eyebrow. Specially for what? For you, Daniel said simply. I hoped you might want to ride sometimes when you visit the ranch. The casual reference to future visits warmed Emma. Their courtship had been proceeding slowly, as she had requested, but lately, she had found herself thinking more often about the possibility of a permanent arrangement of becoming not just a visitor to the Double X, but its mistress. The ride to the ranch took longer than it had by wagon, but Emma enjoyed every moment of it. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, talking easily about the changing seasons, town news, and Hope's latest accomplishments. When they had to ride single file, Emma appreciated the chance to observe Daniel in his element, confident and at ease on horseback in a way he never quite was in town. As they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Emma felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. There stood the house where Hope had been born, where she had taken her first tentative steps toward trusting again, where she had begun to heal from Thomas's betrayal. Daniel watched her face carefully. "Welcome back," he said softly. The ranch had changed subtly since Emma had last seen it. The house had a fresh coat of whitewash, the porch had been repaired, and colorful wildflowers grew in newly built beds along the front path. It was still a modest ranch house, but the improvements spoke of care and attention to detail. "You've been busy," Emma observed as Daniel helped her dismount. He shrugged, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Place needed some work, and I had time on my hands in the evenings." They stabled the horses, then Daniel led her toward the house. As they reached the porch, he hesitated, suddenly looking nervous in a way Emma had rarely seen. "Before we go inside," he said, "there's something I want to show you." He led her around to the side of the house, where a new addition was under construction. The framework was complete and part of the roof was already in place, though the walls weren't yet enclosed. "What is this?" Emma asked, running her hand along the smooth new lumber. "Another bedroom," Daniel said, "and a small sitting room, I thought. If you and Hope ever wanted to visit for longer, you might need the space." Emma studied his face, reading the meaning behind his careful words. "It's a beautiful addition," she said softly. "Hope would love growing up in a place like this." Daniel's eyes lit with hope. "You think so?" "I know so." Emma took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Daniel, I've been thinking about us, about the future." He stepped closer, his full attention on her face. "What about it? We've been courting for 3 months now," Emma said. "In that time, you've shown me nothing but respect and kindness. You've been patient with my caution, understanding about my fears, and the way you are with Hope." She smiled. "She loves you, you know. Her face lights up whenever you enter a room." "I love her too," Daniel said simply. "As if she were my own." Those words, spoken with such quiet certainty, dissolved the last of Emma's doubts. "Ask me, Daniel," she whispered. "Ask me what you've been wanting to ask." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without hesitation, Daniel took her hands in his and knelt on the dusty ground before her. "Emma O'Sullivan," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "From the moment I found you on that road, my life has changed in ways I never expected. You and Hope have brought light and purpose to days that were just about work and survival before. I love you both, and I want nothing more than to spend my life showing you that love every day." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Let me be a husband to you and a father to Hope." Tears filled Emma's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Daniel, we'll marry you." Daniel rose to his feet, his smile radiant as he gathered her into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Emma responded, her arms encircling his neck as she gave herself fully to the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you might still need more time," he admitted. Emma shook her head. "I've had time enough to know my own heart, and it belongs to you, Daniel Xavier." They spent the afternoon walking the ranch, Daniel pointing out improvements he'd made and changes he planned. The Double X was prospering under his care, with a growing herd of cattle and new grazing land recently purchased to the north. "It will be a good place for Hope to grow up," he told Emma as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Room to run, animals to care for, and we can add to the house as our family grows. The casual reference to future children made Emma's heart skip. You want more children? She asked. Daniel's expression turned serious. I do, if you do, but Hope will always be my firstborn in my heart, Emma. I want to adopt her legally, give her my name, if you agree. Emma leaned against his shoulder, overwhelmed by the generosity of spirit in this man who had become the center of her world. I would be honored for Hope to be a Xavier, she said softly. And yes, I want more children with you. Children who will know from the beginning what it means to be truly loved and wanted. They returned to town as dusk was falling, riding closer together than propriety might strictly allow. At the millinery, Harriet waited with Hope, who crowed with delight at the sight of them both. Daniel lifted the baby high, making her giggle. Hello, little one, he said. Your mama and I have news. Harriet's eyes narrowed as she took in their clasped hands and glowing faces. I see, she said. It appears congratulations are in order. Emma was surprised by the lack of resistance. You're not opposed, Harriet sighed, her stern expression softening slightly. Emma, I've watched you these past months. You've bloomed under his attention, become more confident, more settled, and the way he is with Hope. She glanced at Daniel, who was now seated with the baby on his knee, letting her play with his watch chain. It's clear he cares for you both. That's all I ever wanted for you, someone who would value you properly. Thank you, Aunt Harriet, Emma said, touching her aunt's arm. Your approval means a great deal to me. Well, Harriet said briskly, we'll need to plan the wedding. Nothing elaborate, given your situation, but respectable, and you'll need a proper dress. I won't have my niece marrying in calico. As Harriet launched into wedding plans, Emma exchanged a smile with Daniel over Hope's head. This was not the life she had imagined for herself a year ago, pregnant and abandoned in a Colorado town. It was better, richer, more genuine, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding rather than hollow promises. The church was filled to capacity on the first Saturday in November 1875, when Emma O'Sullivan became Emma Xavier. Hope, now 6 months old and dressed in a tiny white gown that matched her mother's simple but elegant wedding dress, was held by Harriet during the ceremony, though she reached persistently for Daniel whenever he glanced her way. I, Daniel, take thee, Emma, to be my wedded wife, he vowed, his voice clear and sure in the hushed church. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Emma repeated the same vows, her voice was steady, her heart full. This was no desperate arrangement, no compromise made for security or respectability. This was a choice made freely, based on love that had grown steadily over months of knowing one another. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Miller declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Daniel's kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the watching congregation. As they turned to face the church, Emma holding Hope now, the Reverend's voice rang out. May I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Xavier and their daughter, Hope. The simple acknowledgement of Hope as their daughter, not just Emma's, brought tears to Emma's eyes. Daniel squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright as they walked down the aisle together. A family united not by blood but by choice and love. The reception at the church hall was modest but joyful, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Even those who had once whispered behind Emma's back now offered congratulations, won over by the obvious happiness of the couple and Daniel's unwavering support of Emma and Hope. As the celebration wound down, Daniel helped Emma and Hope into the wagon that would take them to their new home. Harriet stood on the church steps, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief despite her attempts to maintain her usual composure. You're always welcome at the ranch, Emma told her aunt as they said their goodbyes. It's not so far and we'll be in town regularly. Take care of them, Harriet instructed Daniel. They're precious. I know, Daniel replied seriously. I'll spend my life making sure they're happy and safe, you have my word. As they drove away amid cheers and well wishes, Hope nestled between them on the wagon seat. Emma felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The road that had once seen her at her lowest moment abandoned in labor, without hope, was now carrying her toward a future brighter than any she had dared imagine. "Happy?" Daniel asked, his eyes warm as he glanced at her. Emma nodded, too full of emotion for words. She looked down at Hope, drowsy now after the excitement of the day, then at their joined hands, wedding bands gleaming in the late afternoon light. "I'll get you home, darling," Daniel said softly, echoing the words he had spoken on that fateful day months ago. But this time, home meant something entirely different, not just a place of temporary refuge, but a life built together, a family forged through choice and commitment, a love that had grown from compassion into something enduring and true. As the Double X Ranch appeared on the horizon, the setting sun gilding its modest buildings, Emma felt not the anxiety of an uncertain future, but the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. "We're already home," she replied, squeezing his hand, "wherever we're together." 5 years later, the Double X Ranch had expanded beyond Daniel's original dreams. The herd had tripled in size. The house had grown to include not only the addition Daniel had been building when he proposed, but also a nursery for their second child, Daniel Jr., born 2 years after their wedding. Hope, now 5.5, was the image of her mother in temperament, determined, compassionate, and fiercely loyal, though her dark hair and eyes still hinted at her biological father. But Thomas was a distant memory, relevant only in the rare moments when Hope asked difficult questions about why her birth story was different from her brother's. "Your father couldn't be with us," Emma would explain gently. "But then God sent us Papa, who loved us both from the moment he found us." It was truth enough for a child, and Hope accepted it easily. To her, Daniel was the only father she had ever known, the man who taught her to ride her pony, who read to her every night, who treated her no differently than he did the son born of his blood. The legal adoption had been completed shortly after the wedding, making Hope officially Hope Xavier, a fact she announced proudly to anyone who asked her name. And if some in town still remembered her unusual arrival, they kept such thoughts to themselves out of respect for the Xavier family, who had become valued members of the community. Emma had continued to work with Harriet in the millinery for a time, until Daniel Jr.'s birth made the journey to town too difficult to manage regularly. Now she focused on raising their children and managing the growing household, though she still created beautiful hats for special occasions, a skill that had become more hobby than necessity. Harriet visited often, her stern exterior gradually softening under the influence of her great-niece and nephew's affection. She had even accepted Daniel's offer to build her a small cabin on the ranch property for her retirement years, though she insisted she wasn't ready to leave her shop just yet. On the 5th anniversary of the day Daniel had found Emma on the road, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the children play in the yard. Daniel Jr. toddled after his big sister, who patiently showed him how to feed corn to the chickens. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Emma asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "If you hadn't ridden down that road at that exact moment," Daniel's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my grandmother used to say, that there are no coincidences in life, only moments when we're exactly where we're meant to be." Emma smiled, watching as Hope took her brother's hand, steadying him as he scattered corn for the eager chickens. "I like that thought. That we were meant to find each other, even in such unlikely circumstances." "I can't imagine any other path now," Daniel said, turning to face her. At 37, his hair had more silver threading through the dark, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze still held the same steadfast warmth that had first won Emma's trust. "You and the children, you're everything I never knew I needed." Emma reached up to touch his face, her heart full. In the 5 years of their marriage, they had weathered challenges together, drought seasons that threatened the herd, a difficult birth with Daniel Jr., the occasional resurface of gossip about Hope's parentage. But through it all, Daniel's love had never wavered, his commitment to her and the children never faltering. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" she asked softly. "When you found me on the road," Daniel nodded, a smile touching his lips. "I'll get you home, darling," he quoted. "Little did I know I was bringing my own home to me." "You were," Emma agreed. "Not just shelter or safety, but real home, the kind built on love and trust." From the yard came Hope's clear voice, calling them to see something Daniel Jr. had discovered, likely a frog or interesting rock, given the children's current fascinations. Daniel pressed a quick kiss to Emma's lips before they moved to join their children, hand in hand as they had been since that fateful day on a dusty Texas road. Life had taught Emma that plans could change in an instant, that security could vanish and promises could be broken. But it had also shown her that sometimes, when all seems lost, the right person can appear at exactly the right moment, offering not just rescue but the chance for a new beginning. As Hope ran to meet them, her brother toddling behind, Emma gave thanks once more for the unexpected turn her life had taken for the man who had lifted her from the dust and carried her not just to safety, but to love.